Howard Kurtz.
The meeting. Celebrity quarterback Tom Brady and the Super Bowl champ Tampa Bay Buccaneers visited the White House. Brady saying about 40% of the people still don't think we won. President Biden, I understand that, a reference to you know what. Biden said he wouldn't joke about Brady being the oldest quarterback to win the Super Bowl. And Brady recalled a time when I lost track of one down in 21 years of playing, and they started calling me Sleepy Tom. Why would they do that to me? I don't know, said President Biden. You know, Brady had been perceived as kind of a Trump pal, but he didn't go to the White House during two previous visits by the champion New England Patriots. And conservative media not that thrilled about the Brady performance. The conservative site Breitbart running headlines like this: 5 times Tom Brady called Trump a friend before stabbing him and his supporters in the back. I guess even when you're an athlete, not everybody will cheer you. With your Media Minute, Howie Kurtz, Fox News.
USG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Targeting illegal guns. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The Biden administration says that's how it will end a surge in violent crime. In Chicago, Attorney General Merrick Garland helping to kick off the new effort.
Garland says the ATF's new strike forces will focus on corridors known for heavy illegal gun trafficking.
I think our focus now is both a combination of tactics of building cases against gangs, but also of developing community support and getting the trust of the community for that purpose.
Chicago police report 413 people have been murdered in the city so far this year, 1,800 shootings.
Fox's Matt Finn. The program will also target New York and Sacramento, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Diners ducking for cover in Northwest Washington, D.C. Thursday evening from a drive-by shooting.
We'll find the individuals, and we'll hold them accountable. And that's what we have to do as an entire city. D.C.
Police Chief Robert Conti says 2 people were wounded in the gunfire, while continuing to urge Americans who haven't been to get corona vaccinated. The White House reportedly considering new action on face masks.
Conditions, as they say on the ground, have changed, thanks in large measure to the Delta variant, which is now being blamed for a surge in new cases and hospitalizations. So much so, in fact, that top Biden aides and officials are said to be weighing federal masking guidance, according to the Washington Post. But the White House press secretary called that report breathless and said discussions were happening of a regular order over at the White House and not in response to the spike in cases.
We are regularly in touch and have regular meetings with our public health officials, including the CDC, about how to continue to address the virus.
Still, there is growing anxiety in many areas around the country over whether or not this recent COVID surge needs to be addressed with stricter guidance or mandates.
Fox's Kevin Corke in Washington. America is listening to Fox News.
A 1 and a 2 and a you know what to do.
We're happy to celebrate 77 years. Thank you, Uncle Sam, the reason we're here. Happy Liberation Day, Guam. Bank Pacific's here for you.
Viva Liberation!
Viva!
Viva Bank Pacific!
Viva!
Viva Guam!
Viva!
Member FDIC.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
The state of Mississippi has filed its legal briefs with the Supreme Court in an effort to overturn the ruling that legalized abortion in the U.S.
The legal thrust and parries point to a pending showdown as the Supreme Court prepares to hear this fall oral arguments of a Mississippi case that banned abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. The core issue is whether abortion can be restricted even if the fetus is not viable outside the womb, a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade, a 1973 decision that legalized abortion. The state upped the ante, filing a brief asking the court to overrule Roe in order to uphold the state's restrictions on abortions.
Fox's Lauren Green. In response to critical race theory curricula, Missouri Congressman Josh Hawley is proposing the Love America Act, telling Fox's Tucker Carlson tonight.
My bill would say, listen, if a school district gets federal money, you've got to teach kids the basic truth about the country, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration, Pledge of Allegiance. These are the things, the documents that express the ideals that unite us as Americans. You've got to replace the lies with the truth.
Several states have banned public schools from teaching critical race theory. An Ohio utility admits it bribed state lawmakers to pass a bailout bill.
Akron-based First Energy admitted to a count of honest services wire fraud, conspiracy to deny the public services by means of kickbacks or bribes. It will pay a $230 million fine and continue government cooperation, which acting U.S. Attorney V. Paul Patel says includes
their own internal investigation, identifying issues and facts, and sharing that information with the government.
Patel says First Energy not doing so means its admission of guilt
can, by way of our agreement, be used against First Energy in any resurrected prosecution.
The crime netted several arrests that included the former Speaker of the Ohio State House. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
What's better than yoga on the beach? Yoga on the beach with your favorite Bud Family bucket. Every Friday, grab your mat, koozie, and an ice cold Bud Light seltzer and hold it at Jimmy D's. The Booze and Balance Ladies Night is your new Friday routine. Get in that stretch and happy hour at the same time. Bacardi, Grey Goose, and Bombay Sapphire cocktails are also on special with your favorite Bud Family and seltzers too. We'll see you this Friday for Yoga on the Beach at Jimmy D's. Budweiser reminds you to please relax responsibly.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tuman for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tuman, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. By golly. I can't put enough emphasis on those words. And I do it every day because this is a constitutionally oriented, conservative call-in talk show. And I'm so glad you're with me out there in our international radio listening audience, all you tailgaters, you tailgaters that are posting on Facebook. We've come to the end of another historic week here on Tall Tales. Jose and I are going to go into purgatory here for 2 days until we'll be back in 70 hours on Monday at 1600, but we've done it before. We can make it again, right, Jose?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough, but we can do it. Okay, let's start out with Zemi Ikotny. Small businesses are key and often undervalued component of our island community. This is what the Daily News says. Local entrepreneurs create local jobs and keep money in Guam and circulating through the economy. They also provide economic diversity, with the Wuhan virus pandemic highlighted to be vitally important to our island. While anybody has potential to start a small business, many people are stymied by the cost of securing a location and the red tape involved in meeting regulations and codes, getting permits, etc. That's why an initiative to help establish more home-based businesses throughout Guam is a fantastic idea. A fantastic idea. Guam Unique Merchandise and Art announced a new project, Ibisinun Mami, that aims to develop 6 home-based businesses in each village starting September 30. Guma hopes to better develop Guam's cottage industry, businesses that operate out of a person's home. Guma is 501c3 federally recognized nonprofit, was formed by the Klitzkie Group and DFS in 2013. The Klitzkie Group. To provide business training and incubator support. A grant from the Administration for Native Americans and startup funding from the DFS Group, plus support from public and private partners, allow the Guma program to pursue its goals. We believe that we're going to meet and exceed that goal because there are very talented and motivated individuals within our villages that want to start those businesses. Monica Guzman.
Klitzkie Group.
Guma Executive Director told the Mayor's Council. The group wants to develop entrepreneurial training in villages as well as village resource directories. The nonprofit group will train business owners by condensing its 16-week program into 12 hours. Guma also will help small business owners find a business plan and obtain the certificates needed to work from home. The nonprofit aims to complete a strategic plan by August 15, followed by beta testing of training programs in Dado and possibly 2 more villages September 27. We commend Guam Unique Merchandise and Art for this project and hope residents take advantage of the program to start businesses in their homes. My cynicism gland is starting to function here. And when I see nonprofit and then a grant, doesn't matter who the grant is from, Administrative for Native Americans, it doesn't matter. And then I see all these high-flown plans. What my cynicism gland tells me is, well, there's a grant here, and someone is going to make money off the grant, and it has to have all of this flowery language in it to get approved. Whether it ever accomplishes anything except putting money in the pockets of the people who put the grant together might be another story. I have to admit a strong bias against this whole grant business to begin with. I'm going to just digress for a moment here to my favorite book. It's called The United States Constitution. And in Section 8 of the first of Article 1 of the Constitution, you find this: Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. We know that one pretty well, thanks to Tina Rose Munya Barnes. And then there is a list of things that the Congress can do. It can borrow money on the credit of the United States, regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes, establish a uniform rule of naturalization, constitute tribunals, and etc. And it goes all the way down to number 16, which is to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the District of Columbia. There's nothing in here about federal grants.
Well, I know a little something, just a sliver something about the ANA, Association of Native American. I think that's what they call it, association. But interesting thing that it comes out of the Department of Mental Health. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Yeah, so...
And it is a grant for Native Americans, which we don't necessarily fall under that definition.
Not even close.
But it's an exception, including Hawaii.
Yeah, not even close. So here's my complaint with this whole grant business. The 16 powers of Congress do not include bribing states to do something that you don't have the power to do by giving them money, which is what it amounts to. And there is a case called Frothingham versus Mellon, decided back in the 1920s, where the federal government, the U.S. Treasury, Secretary of the Treasury Mellon, set up this grant in Massachusetts, and Frothingham said, you can't do that. The Constitution doesn't allow you to do that. Frothingham he sued the Secretary, that's how you do that. And the Supreme Court didn't rule on it. They just came back and said, Mr. Frothingham, your stake in the game is so small. The amount of taxes that you pay is so small that you don't have a real cognizable injury. Therefore, you don't have standing. So this whole thing, this whole grant mechanism grew out of the Supreme Court's not wanting to decide a case. And we're stuck with it.
Do you remember back in the 80s, I believe, mid-80s, late 80s, there was a guy on TV with this weird suit selling this big book of free money from the government? It was like some infomercial where you paid for this book of grant. I always wondered, and as a kid, because I was a kid back then, this is cool. Where is all this free money coming from?
Yeah.
As an adult, now I know.
Yeah, it's these grants, where the U.S. government gets involved in stuff that it has no business. It has no business getting involved in encouraging people to start their businesses in their homes. And it's the reason, that's one of the reasons, Frothingham versus Mellon. There was another suit decided the same day called Massachusetts versus Mellon, where the state, in its state capacity, filed the same suit, same result, no standing. So I'm constantly talking about the fact that we don't have a federal government anymore. We have a national government. And it's stuff like this that's given us a national government. During the Vietnam War, it was very popular to say, those kids that are 18 years old can go over there and fight in Vietnam, but they come home, they can't even go into a bar and get a drink. So almost all of the states dropped their drinking age to 18. And that didn't work at all. It did not end well. And the national government said, this isn't cool because there are too many tragedies on the highway. Therefore, we send out a lot of highway money, which is probably okay under Article 8, but you're not going to get it unless you change your laws to 21. Same thing with speed limit. We had during the Carter administration, when we had a fuel crisis, Congress said, you're not going to get any highway funds unless you lower your speed limit to 55 miles an hour. It's what anywhere else would be called extortion. So the national government is able to accomplish things with this grant mechanism that are actually forbidden by the U.S. Constitution, and that's why we have a national government instead of a state government. It's one of the reasons. There are other cases that did the same thing. All right, let's go along and see what the Post has for us today. Lack of access to crucial information, reliable transportation hinders vaccination goal. For some Guam residents, lack of access to crucial public information and reliable transportation is part of their day-to-day challenge. That means not everyone who should be aware actually knows of the Wuhan virus vaccination clinics and the dates and times they're offered and where they're being held. And if they do know, getting to those clinics can be tough without reliable transportation. On Wednesday, the Department of Public Harassment and Secret Services, along with the National Guard, held a Wuhan virus vaccination clinic at the Micronesia Mall. Roughly 75 people showed up to get vaccinated. Some of them were people whose second dose of Pfizer or Moderna vaccines may have been overdue or was right in the time frame of 21 or 28 days. But that number still shows a tepid response to the call from the local government encouraging the thousands of unvaccinated Guamanians to get immunized against Wuhan virus, or for those who have overdue second shots to become fully immunized. The government of Guam was roughly 1,400 people short of its goal to achieve, they call it population immunity. What do we call it, Jose? A little louder, please.
They always go to pasture.
We call it herd immunity, yeah. Which one is better? Herd immunity, yeah. That goal aside, the vaccination clinic that was announced on short notice might have been a success if more people were aware of it. And this was on a major local holiday when many families likely already had plans or were already at their destinations. At Thursday's clinic at the Micronesia Mall, some people said they found out about the clinic only late Wednesday, and so they were able to make it. Some people who spoke to the Post recently said they knew about the vaccination clinics but weren't able to get to the clinics because of transportation issues. Getting time-sensitive information out to the masses in a timely manner is necessary so people can plan to arrange transportation. I have two suggestions. One is skywriting.
At night with drones?
No, just in the daytime, smoke coming out, clinic at such and such a place, right? And the whole drones thing is too new for me to grab a hold of. The second suggestion would be, let's see if we could get the Goodyear blimp out here. Have you ever seen the Goodyear blimp?
I sure have.
Yeah. And put your message on the side of the Goodyear blimp and fly
My eyes would be on it.
Fly it around the island, right? Yeah. That would work.
Do they still do those banners behind the airplanes too?
Yeah, they still do that. That would be another way. That's three ways of doing it, right? Yeah. Let's see. Getting time-sensitive information out to the masses in a timely manner is necessary so people can plan to arrange transportation. And additional ways to get the word out to people who don't check their email often, are not glued to social media, or don't follow news reports every day should be established. Well, here's something that from my childhood, back when I was growing up, back in the 40s, maybe into the very beginning of the 50s, a lot of people in my hometown worked in factories. We had a couple of band instrument factories. We had a creamery, etc. And all of the factories had whistles. And there'd be an 8 o'clock whistle. That means you better be at work. A couple whistles at noon, one at the end of the day. And then we had a fire whistle. It was on the water tower downtown. And if there was a fire, I think somebody at the telephone company could blow the fire whistle and all of the volunteer firemen would stop what they were doing and run to the firehouse. So if you were in Pete Kelly's barbershop and he was about halfway finished with your haircut and the fire whistle blew, you're out of luck. He puts his clippers down and he's out of the front door. He's putting out the fire. And if you wanted to know where the fire was, you'd pick up your phone. This is before dial phones. When you'd pick up the phone and the operator would say, "Number, please." You'd pick up the phone and the operator would say, 415 East Geneva Street. You could run down and take a watch the fireman put out the fire. A very effective way of getting the word out. So we've got sirens in every one of these villages, right? So maybe we get the word out. If there's a vaccine clinic in your village, we'll blow the siren. You pick up your phone and we'll tell you where it is.
What's going on?
Yeah, Back to the Future. Yeah, well, where's your horn? You better beep your horn after that. Yeah.
You got some great ideas. You should be getting a grant for this.
Yeah. First, I'll start a 501c3 corporation and then elect myself president and make sure that I'm paid well for my presidency, right? Mayors hold crucial roles in getting information to the public. They're the ones who know where their constituents live and to some extent what the household circumstances are. Public schools have sought the help of mayors to reach students whose families didn't have reliable phones or transportation at the beginning of the last school year. In the case of the Guam public schools that were not able to reach students right away, the additional efforts to account for the students became a team effort by teachers, principals, social workers, and the mayors in the school districts. That's the model that perhaps should be followed, with a variation that works for the Wuhan virus vaccination program. To some extent, the Department of Public Harassment and Secret Services already is doing that with home vaccination services for those people who are bedridden or otherwise disabled. Our mayors and social workers could team up with DPHSS and partner clinics to identify people who face other struggles, including the lack of transportation. Guam offered incentive, including weekly drawings for a new car and 10 grand in cash and other prizes over the past 6 weeks. The incentives may have helped, as Director Art St. Augustine stated, but looking at the lottery participation rate, you know something's missing. About 100,000 fully vaccinated Guam residents were eligible to enter, but only 60,000 registered online for a chance to win a free car, an iPad, a number of other prizes, not the least of which was up to 10 grand in cash. Perhaps not everyone knew about it or did not have the ability to register. Maybe we should get Tello to enact a statute that requires everyone to listen to Tall Tales every afternoon at 4. That way everybody would get the word.
I concur.
Yeah. But, well, I screwed up again. I said Tello's name without her permission. DPHSS and its partners are to be commended for making clinics available and for coming up with ways to entice residents to get vaccinated. But to get more to participate, a next-level grassroots-oriented outreach is necessary. I have another idea. How about bounties? You bring in someone who hasn't been vaccinated, and we'll give you $25.
Everyone's a Boba Fett.
Say again?
That's a bounty hunter from the Star Wars films.
Well, I was thinking of, what's that guy's name from Hawaii?
Dog.
Yeah, Dog. Yeah, we could get everybody with the long blonde hair. Now, that would work. If you would say, you bring in an unvaccinated person and we'll give you $25, that solves all the problems. It gets the word out. It's the transportation. It's the whole thing.
Well, we know one tool they utilized that really didn't work too well. Chicken Little.
Yeah. As afraid as we were, it didn't work at all. And, of course, the sky did not fall.
It did not.
Okay, so much for Zemi Ikotny. Let's go on to the card. All right, this is what I got on the card today. I've only got one local item. Let me take a break and I'll come back to the card.
Diving and seeing our coral reef full of life.
I really love hiking the trails.
I really love going to the beach. The sunsets are amazing.
Your island needs you. Help preserve what makes our island home. Stop those who threaten our wildlife, plants, and environment. Install the free Toka app and report poaching, littering, burning, and other environmental crimes. Call 864-TOKA or install the free Toka app today. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Department of Agriculture, UOG Sea Grant, and Choice Broadcasting.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning. We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So I've only got one local item on the card today. People just aren't fighting with each other enough here to fill out my card. So the national items I've got are Turley versus the Left. This is my favorite legal columnist, Jonathan Turley. Newspapers versus the U.S. Asian Americans versus critical race theory. The House Unappropriations Committee versus Guam. Wolf versus journalism, and Turley versus Biden. Now, for the local item on the card, it's Tall Tales versus Joe Titano II. And there's enough to talk about there that it may last for a little while. But I'm going to have to do my Rush Limbaugh imitation here again, Jose. You know, Jose, I don't like to spend too much time on the show talking about myself, but this time I have to, because it's about me. So I mentioned that I spoke to the Rotary Club of Guam on Thursday. I gave you a little bit of a kind of a thumbnail of what I talked about. Joe Titano, too, from the Daily News was there. There was also some coverage by the Post, but the Post hasn't run anything, maybe because I was really hard on them for their July 5th editorial.
Maybe they're trying to fact-check you and they still haven't succeeded.
Probably. So this is what Joe Titano ran, the article by Joe Titano in today's Daily News. I'm going to go through it rather slowly and fill in some of the blanks and tell you that this very article proved one of the points that I made. The title of the article is Self-Determination, Decolonization, Separatism, as you were, decolonization, separatism, and what is the title of it? Decolonization, critical race theory, separatists, and the Guam news media. So I made a point about the Guam news media that is proof, there is proof positive of what I'm talking about in this article right here. Okay, so the headline of the article, Klitzkie, self-determination, decolonization, not the same thing. Self-determination for Chamorros and decolonization are not the same thing, according to former Guam Senator and Judge Robert Klitzkie. Klitzkie addressed the Rotary Club of Guam on Thursday in a talk, Decolonization, Critical Race Theory, Separatists, and Guam News Media. He took issue with what he called the local media's gaslighting of the public in equating the idea of self-determination with decolonization. And it's true. I've seen so many articles, you know, the plebiscite, the Dave Davis suit. The plebiscite was about the decolonization of Guam. It was not. It was not about the decolonization of Guam. It was about the, quote, self-determination of four Chamorros. So I proved my point. Let's see if I got my proof here. Probably not. Yeah, I didn't bring it along. And this is how I proved my point. I read Chapter 22 of Title I of the Guam Code Annotated, which says Commission for Commission for Decolonization for the Self-Determination of Chamorro People. And that's all it said. I mean, that's what the chapter is about. It's called the Commission on Decolonization, but that's not what it's about. That didn't make it into Joe's article. Joe goes on to say he cited the section of Guam Code Annotated that lays out the guidelines for the government of Guam's Commission on Decolonization, pointing out that it refers specifically to protecting the political rights of native inhabitants of Guam. Well, that's true, but I also went on to say there's a terrible misquotation in the legislative findings that are on that chapter, because it said the Treaty of Paris guaranteed the right of self-determination, etc., for the native inhabitants of Guam. Not true. And I've been through this before. The Treaty of Paris just said that the political status and civil rights of the inhabitants of the islands shall be determined by Congress. Talk about gaslighting. Gaslighting in a statute. And then the article goes on to say, Chamorro self-determination is potentially, this is a quote, a subset of decolonization, but it's not the whole thing. And then I said, and this is important for all of us because we're all living in a colony, regardless if you're Chamorro or not. And I started out by saying, no one is trying to decolonize the island of Guam. No one is trying to decolonize the territory of Guam. That's true. You have this initiative for the self-determination of the Chamorro people, but that's not the island of Guam, and it's not the territory of Guam. So I started out with that. And then I also pointed out that we've talked about independence, we've heard about independence, but no one has come forward and said, if Guam were independent, if the Chamorro vote were held and a majority of the folks, the Chamorro say, yeah, we want an independent Guam, what happens next? Does the United States send several ships over here to deport all the non-Chamorros before independence sets in? Do we have a Chamocracy, the government of Chamorros, by Chamorros, of Chamorros, for Chamorros, and everybody else is a second-class citizen? Are we going to have a monarchy once Guam is independent? Will we have a government of Soviets? Would we have a three-branch government like we have now, or a parliamentary government? Would we have a dictatorship?
Like we have now, I mean...
Yeah, like we have now. Yeah. So I went into all of these things here when I was talking about decolonization, because none of the media are really going into decolonization. They're taking the easy way. Well, you know, we have a commission, and all 11 members of that commission must be Chamorro. You can't be on the Commission for Decolonization if you're not Chamorro. And you can see where this is kind of going. Yeah. So the media are just content to lay this stuff out without seeking out any other voices or any other approach. And they're very content to say, well, yeah, the Decolonization Commission is interested in determining the political status of Guam. It's not. It's not interested in determining the political status of Guam. No one is doing anything to work on the political status of Guam. Now, there have been people who have had a chance, like Robert Underwood, and Robert Underwood could have introduced 2 bills in the Congress that would have really defined the issue. First bill, an Enabling Act. In order for a state to be a territory to become a state, the process is this. An Enabling Act is drafted that's approved by the folks in the territory. It's submitted to the Congress. If the Congress likes it, they'll enact it they'll pass it. The president signs it, and boom, you got a new state. The other bill that could have been introduced was a bill that said that pursuant to Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, the United States relinquishes sovereignty over the island of Guam effective January 1, 2023 or whatever. And Guam would have become independent. So Guam either becomes a state or Guam becomes independent. We'd have something to talk about then as far as political status, wouldn't we? But nobody ever, none of our Congress representatives ever did that, including Robert, who is one of the leaders of the whole separatist movement. So it's much more, I suppose it's more enjoyable just to sit around and grouse about, well, no one ever gave us a chance for self-determination. With the Spanish colonists, colonialists, and the Japanese and the Americans, etc. Going on with the article, Klitzkie referred to the local organizations that advocate Chamorro self-determination as separatists who overlook the local governance currently in place. That's true. The self-determination folks talk about self-determination, but when you come right down to it, I once again explained to the Rotarians how we were euchred into this corner where there are allegedly 3 choices, only one of which is an actual possibility, and that's independence. So I said, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to take you down to McDonald's and treat you to dinner. You could have a T-bone steak at McDonald's, or lobster, or a Big Mac. And that's kind of where we are, where independence is the Big Mac. And the other 2 are just not either feasible or possible. And then it goes on to say, Klitzkie expressed a personal preference for the status quo, which could be improved upon. According to Klitzkie, this vocal portion of the community was likely fewer than 1,000 people, but were elevated by biased media. And, I used the example of Anamita Carr, who, how many times, I should have counted, but I'll bet you 50 times we found her articles that slanted towards Protege Texan. So you could have a situation where the commander of Anderson Air Force Base was in a car accident. And Anamita writes it up at noon on yesterday. The commander of Anderson was in a car accident on Marine Corps Drive. He was taken to the hospital, but he'll recover. He's okay. He didn't have any statements to make about the machine gun range at Anderson, which is hotly contested by on and on and on. Anything that dealt with the military, she wrote it up. And then she really played hide the ball on Carlotta Leon Guerrero's playing hide the ball. Remember that? Yeah, when
Shippo.
yeah, when she wanted to blame it on the military when it was really the Shippo that was playing hide the ball. So, so I laid that out, and I pointed out that, you know, I had the release that PNC ran from Finogi about their little Chautauqua on the night of the 20th of July, and it really made Finogi look really good in this story on PNC. And then I pointed out, it's a press release. They just run the press release without any reportage at all. And the average person sitting there watching TV, and oh yeah, he just takes it for granted. And I cited a couple of other examples of media bias of giving this small but vocal group a much louder voice than they would merit based on their numbers or just about any other criteria. It's like these scenes that, you know, if you have a dozen people standing around on a street corner, if you use the right the right camera angle, you can make that look like a real big crowd. Or you zoom out and you see it's just a dozen people. It's that kind of thing, you know. All of the demonstrations along the road where there'd be 3 people out there waving signs, right? So I pointed that out, and of course I spent a lot of time on the Post and their their July 5th editorial, which openly advocated independence.
It was a secession.
Yeah. and the half-hearted attempt to walk it back. So I did point out that the whole separatist movement, if I describe what critical race theory is, and that is that, you know, you start out by convincing people that everything must be viewed through the prism of race. And that you go back to some historical events where you could put the United States in a not so favorable light, and then you judge that by today's manners, morals, and ethics and condemn it because it doesn't measure up. And then you pretend that it happened just yesterday and that because of this historical event, the system is so corrupted that it could never be fixed. And I offered the audience, draw a parallel here. See if you could find anything like this on Guam. You know, with the beating up on the Navy, the Navy captain that said something that we didn't like back in 1904, and all of the therefores that arose from that. Bavacqua and Laura Souter's use of 4th of July and Liberation Day as pedestals by which to advance the separatist cause, which they do every year, and all of those things. And I laid that out, and the part about the bias on the part of the media, and then here's the last sentence of this article by Joe Titano. He says, decolonizations, as you were. Let me go back one sentence. On Guam, proponents of critical race theory take issues from the past out of context by applying the ethics, manners, morals of today, according to Klitzkie. The result, he stated, was usually the conclusion that the U.S. was hopelessly, systemically racist. Now, the chairman of the Commission on Decolonization's Independent Task Force, Michael Lujan Bavacqua, took a different stance. That's in this article. Now, how did that get in there?
Was he there?
He was not there.
Did he call in? Nope. FaceTime while you were there?
Nope. He certainly hasn't been on Tall Tales.
So I guess they kind of proved your point.
Exactly. This very article proves exactly what I was talking about. that they will find some way of bringing in the separatists, no matter what the article, no matter what the context. Decolonization Independence Task Force Chairman Michael Lujan Bavakwa took a different stance. Klitzkie described Bavakwa on Thursday as the archetypical separatist. Yeah, and I'm going to describe Joe Titano, too, as the archetypical aider and abettor, masquerading as a journalist. I guess he took over for Anamita Carr. So, you know, the irony of this whole thing, it just jumps up and smacks you in the face. So, I am occasionally asked, you know, by people, why are you beating this drum so hard, Bob? You know, there aren't that many of them, and you know, most, you know, everybody I know likes things the way they are right now. They're not going to have a rally down at Epau Beach where they all burn their passports or something like that. So why do you keep doing this? And my answer is this, that I don't think they're convincing very many adults. People defining adults, maybe 25 or older, right? Because most people just aren't that gullible. But for younger, impressionable folks, yeah, this stuff could be very, and of course that's the critical race theory folks prey on the young people. Critical race theory in the colleges isn't bad enough. They're trying to bring it into first grade in the mainland. So that's why I think we all have a responsibility to chime in on this whole idea of self-determination, decolonization, critical race theory, etc. Because anyone who wants to advocate independence, we have a First Amendment, you're perfectly free to do that. And like Voltaire said, I disagree with your saying that, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But to try to influence young, impressionable minds along those ways, and we've got Julian Ugga now writing a textbook for high school kids. Yeah, it is not a good scenario. It's not going to end well.
It's like the majority of this island is clueless to some of these things. Again, probably a nice guy, but his rhetoric and his profession and everything he's written does not bode well for a children's book.
It does not. Does not at all. And, yeah, okay, let's take a short break here, and I'll wrap this up.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community, yet national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere, on your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Wow, nice smile. So perfect and all.
Thanks. I owe it all to Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile team. They do wonders for a healthy, happy mouth.
Got teeth? Don't wait until they hurt. Schedule your routine checkup and cleaning with Dr. Yang and his Smile team. Suite 119 in the East-West Business Center, Upper Tumon. Call 647-8702 or 3.
The best thing that happened to teeth since toothpaste.
Dr. Yang and his Smile team.
They make smiles happen.
And I found the paper I was looking for, and I want to just spend a few more minutes on this, and I'll wrap it up. The three choices: independence, statehood, and free association. Well, it's really independence, free association, or any other integration with the mother country that satisfies those in the colonies in a free and fair election. So even the gaslighting there And then, of course, the newspaper, the media gobble up this only three choices without any critical thinking at all. They don't present it as according to Melvin Borja or according to Michael Bavacqua, there are only three choices. They present it as an accomplished, irrefutable fact. Guam only has three choices, which is just wrong. And then here's the language I was looking for. Even our statute gaslights, Chapter 10, as you were Title 1, Chapter 21, Commission on Decolonization for the Implementation and Exercise of Chamorro Self-Determination. That's the title of Chapter 21. Yeah, self-determination. And then there's legislative findings, and this is legislative findings. The United States, as a succeeding colonial power over the lands and the people of Guam, acceded to and recognized in the 1898 Treaty of Paris that the political rights of the native inhabitants shall be protected and that their collective rights to political self-determination is inalienable. Our law says that that's what is in the Treaty of Paris. Now, if you swore in court that that's what it said, you'd be guilty of perjury, because this is what the Treaty of Paris actually says. The civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by the Congress. And that's it. And it also says, consistent with these inalienable principles, the native inhabitants have been recognized by the United States Congress in the 1950 Organic Act of Guam, specifically in 48 U.S.C. 1421, as you read, 14211, as reenacted in 8 U.S.C. 1407. And here's what that section says. The following persons and their children born after April 11, 1899 are declared to be citizens of the United States as of August 1st, 1950, if they were residing on August 1 on the island of Guam or other territory over which the United States exercises rights of sovereignty. Not even close. So we have a statute. We have something in the statute that books that's a lie. Yeah, just a plain, flat-out lie.
To get that, what's the word, mitigated, does that have to go through a whole process, or can someone just, oh no, that's a whole process.
Which is?
To fix that.
To fix the
wording.
The statute?
Yeah, the statute.
Yeah, you introduce a bill and change the statute, yeah. But, of course, you would then run the, and this, I think this kind of scares people. They're afraid of being canceled. Well, you know, the separatists, and Michael Bavacqua and Robert Underwood, they're Chamorro, right? And so is Laura Sauter. They're Chamorro, and they're standing up for the Chamorro people. So if I said anything critical of them, people would think I'm not a good Chamorro. That dynamic is at work, and actually the opposite is the truth. Gaslighting anybody is never good for that person. And the more gullible the people, the more injurious the gaslighting becomes. So I'm still chuckling over Joe Titano proving my point for me in the very story.
And you didn't even have to pay him.
No, I didn't even have to ask him to do it. He just did it on his own. I suppose his conscience required him to set the record straight. Kind of reminds me of an interview that I did with PNC one time when I was, before I was doing this, with Francisco Esteves. I don't know if you remember that controversy. And he was a National Guardsman. And I was attempting to FOIA the Adjutant General of the National Guard for some papers that were newsworthy. And the adjutant, I accused the Adjutant General of stonewalling, etc. I did my own release. KOAM said they wanted to do an interview. Not PNC, KOAM said they wanted to do an interview. So I said, okay. I met them out in front of the studio. We did the interview, and it didn't run the next night. That night. And then the next night, they ran an interview in Estevis's office with his medals in the background, with him talking about his Army career and everything else, etc. And the item about the Adjutant General of the National Guard was like one sentence, kind of an afterthought. So the reporter there took that story, which I thought was a hard-hitting FOIA story, and turned it into a puff piece for Francisco Esteves, who wasn't even in the story. All in the name of journalism. Carl, call back right after the halftime show, and we'll get you on then. I didn't want to start you before the show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
More cases of the coronavirus in the U.S. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Up more than 53% from a week ago, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Most of the new cases of the Delta variant. President Biden says there's an easy answer.
The vaccines are good against all of the variants that are out there, including the Delta variant.
But vaccine hesitancy continues in some places. The CDC says 40% of the new cases are in Texas, Florida, and Missouri. A vaccine mandate triggering a protest from some New York City healthcare workers.
One might expect people who work in hospitals would be lining up to get vaccinated, but as we've seen across the nation, this is not always the case. At New York Presbyterian, not only are some workers not getting poked, but they are protesting a mandate that they do, arguing that it's their right to make their own healthcare decisions. The New York City Health Department is now requiring all hospital employees in the city to be vaccinated.
Fox's Gary Baumgarten. China says it will not take part in a new investigation of the pandemic.
Beijing slamming the door on a new probe into the origins of COVID-19. A top Chinese official saying a new investigation of COVID, which would include looking at a possible leak from the virology laboratory in Wuhan, China, is impossible to accept. While the World Health Organization originally found the theory the virus escaped from that lab highly unlikely, they are now calling the finding premature and are seeking better access and more answers from the Chinese.
Fox's Greg Palcott with opening ceremonies coming in just 4 hours. There are now 13 athletes at the Summer Olympics in Tokyo who have tested positive for the coronavirus, as have nearly 100 non-athletes, including some media workers. First Lady Jill Biden in Tokyo giving American athletes a pep talk Friday. America is listening to Fox News.
A 1 and a 2 and a you know what to do.
We're happy to celebrate 77 years. Thank you, Uncle Sam, you're the reason we're here. Happy Liberation Day, Guam. Bank Pacific's here for you.
Viva Liberation!
Viva!
Viva Bank Pacific!
Viva!
Viva Guahan!
Viva!
Member FDIC.
Mezcla, Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
The Speaker of the House says if Kevin McCarthy won't, she may appoint more Republicans to the Select House Committee to probe the Capitol riot.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is not ruling out appointing additional Republicans to a select committee formed to investigate the violent breach of the Capitol on January 6th.
There are some members who would like to be on it, but we'll see.
The Speaker defended her refusal to accept two Republicans named to the panel, Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, citing previous comments and actions from those Republicans. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says the other three Republicans he named to the panel will not participate in a sham process.
Because it's not going to change the outcome of what it seems like a predetermined or already written report.
Wyoming Republican Liz Cheney, selected by Pelosi, will serve on the panel. On Capitol Hill, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
The Florida company whose IT management software was exploited in a ransomware attack earlier this month has received a software key that will decrypt all of the computers crippled in the attack at more than 1,000 businesses and organizations. But a spokesman for Casilla won't say if they paid a ransom to the hackers. The Garden State taking steps to get the lead out of its drinking water.
Public water systems throughout the state of New Jersey are being ordered to take inventory of their pipes, specifically if they have any lead pipes still. The inventory could be done over the next 10 years, according to a new law signed by Governor Phil Murphy. This makes New Jersey the latest state to raise alarms about potential lead contamination of its drinking water supply. No amount of lead in water is safe for human consumption, and it will cause illness, including developmental issues for children. Lead was banned from use in water pipes in 1980, but much of the state's water system predates that. Eben Brown, Fox News.
Word from Pittsburgh, 4 people, including a police officer, have been wounded in a shooting. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
What's better than yoga on the beach? Yoga on the beach with your favorite Bud Family bucket. Every Friday, grab your mat, koozie, and an ice cold Bud Light seltzer and hold it at Jimmy D's. The booze and balance ladies' night is your new Friday routine. Get in that stretch and happy hour at the same time. Bacardi, Grey Goose, and Bombay Sapphire cocktails are also on special with your favorite Bud Family and seltzers too. We'll see you this Friday for yoga on the beach at Jimmy D's. Budweiser reminds you to please relax responsibly.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Hey, big news! Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community, yet national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere, on your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the Radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Okay, Carl, thanks for waiting. I didn't want to get you started before the big halftime show and not give you enough chance to share all of the dangerous words that you have to share with the folks out here. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll try not to be too dangerous. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on your thoughts about Well, I wanted to comment about what we see that has happened in the States with all the radicalism that's flowing out of the schools and the colleges, and how that's a forewarning of what is coming to Guam. My mother's generation, the occupation generation, the war generation are dying off. Out of the 10 siblings in my mom's family, there's only 2 left. The generation after that is dying off, and that's a generation that really appreciates personal freedom. The younger generations are being indoctrinated by the left. And so what we see happening in the States is coming to Guam. And the seeds are already being planted here. I'll read a quote that's attributed to Vladimir Lenin. He said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." And the Bolsheviks, which Lenin was the leader, the Bolshevik Revolution, were so convinced of the importance of education that during the Bolshevik Revolution, during this bloody civil war that killed upwards of 7 million men, women, and children, they printed, they somehow found the money which they could not afford during this violent, bloody period. They found the money to print some of John Dewey's works. John Dewey is the father of American education. He was a communist sympathizer, and the communists liked his ideas. They liked them so much that they I think it was 3 years after his first book, Schools of Tomorrow, they invested money in printing a Russian translation of that. And then after that, about a year after that, they invested in a Russian translation of Dewey's How We Think. And again, this was during the height of this horrible period, during the misery that was unleashed by the Russian Civil War in 1921, and which killed upwards of 7 million men, women, and children. So the left, for many, many decades, has been well aware of the value of getting into the minds of the children and planting.
So you can understand then why I think it's so important to keep educating the public as to what's really going on, right, Carl?
Yes, exactly. Because a lot of people are just blowing it off. There's so few, and it's not a big deal. I didn't understand this for a long time, but the more I began to read and observe what was happening in the States and see what was happening here, I started to connect a few dots, and I began to see, wow, this is really coming. This is happening, and something needs to be done. And parents are standing up, against the school boards in the States with this indoctrination, this critical race theory, and this sexualizing of young children.
But here, as you can see, we got to stand up against the media.
Very true.
That article by Joe Titano II is the most concrete proof you could ever ask for. He did exactly what I said they're doing.
Yeah, but that is the fruit of what is happening in our schools. They're not raising, like in journalism, it's like the statement made by Howard Zinn. He openly admitted in an interview, that I'm not interested in teaching accurate history. I want to change the world.
Right.
Howard Zinn was a Marxist. He didn't care about accurate history. When you read his best-selling book, you won't find this thick note section at the back showing where he got all his,
bibliography. Yeah.
Yes, the bibliography, the notes section. If you go to a true historian like Paul Johnson, the British historian, they've got a massive note section in the back, so that people who are curious how he came to his conclusions, they can go back there and look at it. Howard Zinn, you won't find that. A lot of it is made up whole cloth. It's really dangerous, and but it's sold a few million copies. So this is going on in our schools. They're coming for the minds of our children, and it's sad, but people need to wake up. This is going on.
Okay.
Anyway, I just wanted to kind of chime in and add to your comments and try to stress how critical a time this is. And, this is, it can't be taken for granted. This is what happened in the States. They kind of kicked back and said, they're just a small group of radicals and it's no big deal. And before you know it, they're in the streets, burning down buildings because those seeds have been planted over a long period of time. And then people go out into the community, go into journalism, go into education, go into the media, other types of media, and plant more seeds. And before you know it, here we are.
True enough, Carl.
All right, Bob, thank you for allowing me to make a few comments. Appreciate it.
Always good to hear you on the show. So long. Well, the next item on the card ties right into what our Carl is talking about. It's Turley versus Hannah Jones. And Hannah Jones, let's see, what's her first name? Nicole Hannah Jones is the author of the 1619 Project, which is the cornerstone of critical race theory on the mainland. And Jonathan Turley, I've talked about so many times how much I like him, the fact that he knows our island, etc. And here's what he says. The headline of this article is Hannah Jones, all journalism is activism. We have been discussing the academic saga over the offer of an academic chair by the University of North Carolina to controversial New York Times Magazine reporter Nicole Hannah Jones. University of North Carolina rescinded the offer, but then re-extended the offer without tenure. Hannah Jones accepted, but then changed her mind and demanded tenure. University of North Carolina then gave her tenure, and she changed her mind and took a chair at Howard University. The opposition to Hannah Jones was based on the historical errors in her 1619 project. I've talked about one of those errors myself on more than one occasion. Now Hannah Jones is removing any doubt about her view of journalism, and that the criticism of the 1619 Project, this is not journalism. You're not doing fact-checking. You're kind of Howard Zinning it is what you're doing it, right? And now she removes any doubt. She has declared that all journalism is activism. That's kind of what Matt warned us of here about 3 weeks ago. You remember that? Yeah. Hannah Jones told CBS that journalists now have to set aside notions of neutrality. When you look at the model of the Washington Post, right? And it should be the motto, not the model. When you look at the motto of the Washington Post, right? Democracy dies in darkness. That's not a neutral position, but our methods of reporting have to be objective. We have to try to be fair and accurate. And I don't know how you can be fair and accurate if you pretend publicly that you have no feelings about something that you clearly do. Reporters are now claiming greater and greater license to frame news to illustrate the truth as they see it, like telling us what Michael Bavacqua thinks. Reporters are now, as you were, they nod to the need for fairness, but then note they have to tell the truth about society and politics as they see it. They then seek to frame rather than report the news. Hannah Jones is a great example of how this new journalism quickly becomes raw advocacy. We've been discussing how writers, editors, commentators, and academics have embraced rising calls for censorship and speech controls, including, and this, he says, President-elect Joe Biden and his key advisors. Even journalists are leading attacks on free speech and the free press. Bias is now treated as something that is natural and motivating. Recently, Lauren Wolf, the recently fired freelance editor for the New York Times, has not only gone public to defend her pro-Biden tweet, but published a piece titled, quote, I'm a biased journalism, as you were, I'm a biased journalist, and I'm okay with that. This movement includes academics rejecting the very concept of objectivity in journalism in favor of open advocacy. Columbia Journalism Dean, the Dean of the Columbia University School of Journalism, and the Dean and the New Yorker writer Stephen Call has denounced how the First Amendment right to freedom of speech was being weaponized to protect disinformation. In an interview with the Stanford Daily, Stanford journalism professor Ted Glasser insisted that journalism needed to, quote, free itself from this notion of objectivity to develop a sense of social justice. This is the dean, of one of the premier universities in the United States, Columbia, a good Ivy League school. And he's the dean of journalism, so where can we possibly go from here? And, of course, Columbia is the same outfit that brought the freedom, as were the Frankfurt School, to the United States in 1933, so I guess we shouldn't be surprised. Glasser rejected the notion that journalism is based on objectivity and said that he views journalists as activists because journalism at its best, and indeed history at its best, is all about morality. Thus, journalists need to be overt and candid advocates for social justice, and it's hard to do that under the constraints of objectivity. Oh. Talk about a smoking gun, huh?
What did he say about disinformation?
Yeah. And he's a writer for New Yorker. Now, I read New Yorker and I read Atlantic, and there's some really good writers, and I really appreciate good writing. Like I understand that Beethoven, who was deaf, could pick up a piece of sheet music and really get a lot of enjoyment out of just reading a piece of sheet. I'm kind of that way with good writers. I really enjoy good writers, even if I don't agree with the stuff that they're saying. So there's some good writers there, but boy, both of those publications are really hard left. For those of us who have worked for decades as columnists and in the media, like Turley does a pretty good job of getting his point across and letting you know what the other side of the issue is at the same time. He has really been hard on the Trump bashers for what I think are good reasons. People are bashing Trump not because of what he did, but because he's Trump. And Turley said he voted for Hillary, and he's a Democrat, but, when you read something that he writes, he usually lets you know that there's another way of looking at it, and he usually tells you what it is. For those of us who have worked for decades as columnists in the media, the growing intolerance for dissenting views is stifling and alarming. Hannah Jones has been a leading voice in attacking those with opposing views. A year ago, the New York Times denounced its own publishing of an editorial by Senator Tom Cotton calling for the use of troops to restore order in Washington after days of rioting around the White House. It was one of the lowest points in the history of modern American journalism. Well, Congress would call in the troops 6 months later to quell the rioting in the Capitol on January 6. New York Times reporters and columnists called the column historically inaccurate and politically insightful. Reporters insisted that Cotton was even endangering them by suggesting the use of troops, and insisted that the newspaper cannot feature people who advocate political violence. 1 year later, the New York Times published a column by an academic who has previously declared that there's nothing wrong with murdering conservatives and Republicans. You know, and what a shame. You know, the New York Times, their motto, all the news that's fit to print.
There's like no shame because they openly do this.
Yeah.
As if we're oblivious to it.
Really, and it used to be when I was traveling, I never could afford a subscription to the New York Times, but you find one maybe, and I thought,
On the train.
what a prize! I found the New York Times. That's a whole afternoon of good reading, and it's reliable because it's New York Times. Washington Post, Watergate, same thing, and they're both. You know, I would rather read Mad Magazine than those two newspapers because it's probably more factual. Okay, going back to Curley's article here, Curley's column, it is thus no surprise that Hannah Jones will now teach the same biased approach to journalism students at Howard University. What is saddening is the silence of most journalism professors as they watch their profession just become a new form of advocacy. Few want to risk the professional attacks and opposing figures. Yeah, the professional attacks and opposing figures like Hannah Jones, because if you do, you know what you are. You're a racist. You have to be. You couldn't be anything other. However, this movement is killing their profession. Polls show trust in the media at an all-time low, with less than 20% of citizens trusting television or print media. Yet this takes a lot of pressure off used car salesmen. Yet reporters and academics continue to destroy the core principles that sustain journalism and ultimately the role of a free press in our society. Yeah, it's just amazing. And Matt, you warned us. You really did. One of our posters, one of our callers, you warned us. But this really ties into Joe Titano and Michael Bavacqua, who wasn't there, you know, but you had, in order to get the message across, you had to get his name in there.
It makes me want to anticipate the next time they write about Bavacqua or something similar, that they interject your name in it. Let's see.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, right. You want to give me odds on that bet? All right. Next item, newspapers versus the United States. And this is something that, it's another Turley column. This is from July 15. We have been discussing the rapid decline of American journalism. As news organizations adopt echo and advocacy journalism as models, the public has lost faith in the media as a source of information. This is coming at a time when journalism professors are arguing the abandonment of objectivity as the touchstone of the journalists. The result is the death of American journalism as reporters frame the news to reaffirm their own views or that of insular groups. That decline is reflected in chilling detail in a new Gallup poll. The poll found only 21% of respondents said they had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in newspapers, while only 16% of respondents reported the same of television news. Not surprising, Congress fared even worse with 12%. And you know, I remember in my younger days, well, the question was, how do you know that? Well, I saw it in the paper. Oh, okay. Yeah, that was good. What is interesting is that media figures do not appear to care about the destruction of their own profession. The public now ranks the United States as dead last in terms and trust in the media. Yet reporters continue to saw on the limb upon which they sit. Good analogy.
I like that visual.
Yeah. The reason is that such echo journalism works for them even if it destroys their professions, like Matt said. All right, let's see what the papers are saying in Chicago. See if we can find a New York Times laying around Wrigley Field.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
To the greatest generation who endured the Japanese occupation, to those who risked their lives for our freedom, to those who continue to protect our freedom and keep our island safe, we thank you. To the people of Guam, our viewers and generous supporters, happy Liberation Day from PBS Guam KGTF Channel 12. Catch the three-part special program 77th Guam Liberation Village to Village We Are Survivors on demand on PBS Guam's YouTube page.
Special thanks to Choice Broadcasting.
So here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago, looking for that copy of the New York Times to see which biased reporter got the headline today. So back to Jonathan Turley's column, only 21% of Americans trust newspapers. What is interesting is the media figures do not appear to care about the destruction of their own profession. Many journalists have advanced on a new model of advocacy journalism. Many others have been intimidated by the treatment of those who have voiced dissenting views. They are not going to stick their heads up when others have been decapitated for speaking up. Cable networks have always leaned left or right. However, now networks and newspapers are openly biased in framing their coverage. With a reduction of faith in the media plunging downward, these companies could see the value in returning to objectivity and neutrality. The problem is that the journalists themselves are now asserting advocacy journalism as a moral or normal imperative, and few editors will risk confronting such bias even if they were inclined to do so, like the guy at the New York Times that got canned. There was actually a revolt. The reporters took over the editorial boardroom, said, "You don't get rid of this guy, we're all quitting." We've been discussing how writers, editors, commentators, and academics have embraced rising calls for censorship and speech controls, including Joe Biden and his key advisors. Even journalists are leading attacks on free speech. What is interesting, as you were, is that this fundamental challenge of journalistic values is not being widely discussed. For those of us who have worked for decades as columnists, the growing intolerance for dissenting views is stifling and alarming. Let's see here. Critics have never explained what was historically false or outside of the range of permissible interpretation in Tom Cotton's column. Moreover, writers Taylor Lorenz, Katie Weaver, Shara Frankel, and J.C. Fortin, and others said that such columns put black reporters in danger and condemn publishing Cotton's viewpoint. In a breathtaking surrender, the newspaper apologized and not only promised an investigation in how such opposing view could find itself on its pages. This sounds like the Post. But promised to reduce the number of editorials in the future. One of the writers who condemned the decision to publish Cotton was Nicole Hannah-Jones. Hannah-Jones applauded the decision of the Times to apologize for publishing such an opposing viewpoint and denounced those who engage in what she called even-handedness, both-sidism journalism, both-sidism, telling both sides of the story, even-handedness. You can't do that. Opinion editor James Bennett was rustled out to make a pleading apology. That, however, was not enough. He was later compelled to resign. Not only has Hannah-Jones spread bizarre anti-police conspiracy theories, she is one of the most prominent figures pushing the advocacy journalistic model. Nevertheless, she was offered a chair at North Carolina and accepted at Howard. My greatest concern is this trend in academia. It's enormously popular for faculties to support the new model of advocacy journalism. It leads to publication and speaking opportunities. It is a type of woke journalism. To oppose it is to risk your own standing as an academic and the opportunities that allow you to be intellectually active. So the downward spiral continues. The media becomes more and more openly biased as new reporters are trained as advocates. The fact that fewer and fewer people are reading such reporting is immaterial. Eventually, if this trend continues, the media will be reduced to speaking to itself and small groups of ideologically hardened readers. I like this guy. Well, I filed a petition for a writ of I told you so probably a couple years ago, and now I'm going to ask that it be granted. When I first started talking about the Frankfurt School on Tall Tales, I suspect a lot of people thought, Frankfurt School? Is that where Bob went to college? Didn't know what I was talking about. And I was talking about this group of Marxists in 1922 in Frankfurt University who decided that the Marxist model was wrong, that the workers of the world would not unite to lose their change. You wouldn't find workers revolting to overthrow the bourgeoisie. In fact, in World War I, we found that German workers could kill French workers and vice versa with great abandon. The fact that they were workers meant nothing at all. So the guys in the Frankfurt School, a guy named Theodor Adorno, Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse, 6 or 7 of them, all of them the children of rich families, decided that that type of Marxist model wouldn't work. And the way to make Marxism a reality was to hollow out the institutions of the West, the colleges and universities, the schools, the media, the government, if possible, and do that basically by gaslighting, that by convincing them that the things that they thought they knew, really they didn't know at all. And they were they have been successful. They're all probably rolling around in their graves, laughing themselves to death, except they're already there. Their plan has been far more successful than they ever dreamed it could possibly be. It really took off in the 1960s when it was cool to disregard all morality and convention. Free love, let it all hang out. If it feels good, do it. Let's take over the president's office and let's run the college. And then you had academia caving in to these radicals. Well, those radicals are out of college now. They're mature. They're running the country, and they're running it smack into the ground. So these reporters who think that objectivity is this both sidesism has no place in journalism are trained by the folks from the 60s. So some gigantic chickens have come home to roost. And it started in 1922. The eggs were laid. They were hatched in the 1960s. And the chickens have been running around on the ground up until the whole George Floyd incident, where a career criminal who was resisting arrest was killed on camera. Lucky for them, right? And now the whole thing has just gotten completely out of control, where you pick up a newspaper, and I'm just waiting for the New York Times to change its name from the New York Times to Pravda, because that's the kind of journalism they're doing. They're supporting an agenda. So once again, I just got to say, I told you, this is where it's going. On the local front, Tom Mendiola wants to know, are we already teaching C in our schools? And this is my point. This is the point I made at the Rotary yesterday. If you look at the whole separatist movement, you see it. If they're not practicing critical race theory, they're certainly mirroring it. They're using all of the same items. They're starting out with historical incidents that they're pretending happened yesterday. They're judging historical incidents with today's manners, models, matters, and morals, and condemning them, saying that because of these historical incidents, things will never change. The United States government will always crap on the Chamorro people, etc., and that the only salvation is self-determination, which they have the process of which they have manipulated to the point where that can only mean one thing: separating from the United States. And we've got Julian Uggan, an arch separatist, writing a textbook for the high school. So how's that going to work out? I don't know. I don't have a handle on what's being taught in the high schools or the grade schools, but I don't have a very good feeling about it either, Tom, especially with the bias that the media is showing towards this whole separatist movement. The examples that I gave you were even the article that covered my speech at the Rotary had a classic where one of the elements of my speech was the bias of the media. And that very article demonstrated exactly what I was talking about. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question, but it's the best I can do with where we actually are right now. I don't have a good feeling about it.
It's a very simplistic analogy, but it's like that analogy they talk about with the frog in the slowly boiling water.
Absolutely.
That's what's happening.
Yeah, the water keeps getting hotter, the frog doesn't notice, and before the frog knows it, he's boiled to death. Yeah, that's where we are. And I explained early in the show that that's why I think it's so important that I'll take every opportunity, every Rotary Club. I'll put a soapbox in the back of my Rocky. If I see a half a dozen people standing on the street corner, I'll pull up and climb up on my soapbox, because I think it's important for everyone to understand exactly where we are. Okay, next item on the card is Asian Americans versus critical race theory. And I notice I've got somebody here climbing into the green room. Maybe I'll check that out. It's probably another Joe. Oh, it's Frenchie. Okay, it's Frenchie. Let's head for Churchill Downs, and then we'll entertain Frenchie.
Diving and seeing our coral reef full of life.
I really love hiking the trails.
I really love going to the beach. The sunsets are amazing.
Your island needs you. Help preserve what makes our island home. Stop those who threaten our wildlife, plants, and environment. Install the free TOCA app and report poaching, littering, burning, and other environmental crimes. Call 864-TOCA or install the free TOCA app today. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Department of Agriculture, UOGC Grant, and Choice Broadcasting.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Okay, so here we are, Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. That means we're on the home stretch of Tall Tales today. And I'm going to ask Frenchie to help me to get to the finish line. Good afternoon, Frenchie.
Good afternoon, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I can see all that bluegrass around us right now. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So anyway, your whole expose reminds me of the old saying that there is only two types of journalists: whores and out of a job. You know, and basically that's what we've seen. And on previous call, I've talked about the unholy alliance between the drive-by media, like our chief Dito head used to call it, big tech, and Wall Street. And with the DNC in the back, you being the instrument of that unholy alliance. What you have now is basically the results of 40 or 50 years of continuous degradation. It comes at different levels. I mean, you have had in the education system, especially at the high school level, what I call the dumbing down of knowledge. If you look on Guam only, if you look at the product of the high schools, which are the people like your spouse and many of our friends, the education level was very good. And actually, you see the level of education of those people is excellent. A lot of them went on to get masters and PhD, and at a time when a few women were able to do so. And they are very smart people, and they think for themselves. But once you had the acceleration of the dumbing down of education, especially in the inner cities, which create its own vacuum of lack of education, criminal behavior, which is followed by reactions and continued. It's a vicious circle where you basically lock in a whole large part of the population. At the same time, our elites, first in the elite colleges of the United States, but then after that to the whole education system, has really done what you were demonstrating with the Frankfurt School, And what is happening now is that and I was talking about that when I was listening 6 or 7 years back when I was in Taipei, was a very famous journalist who is a very nice guy. What was his name? Mike Shenoy. You know, maybe you remember him. During the Tiananmen Square, he was the CNN bureau chief in Beijing, and he's the one that reported on the repression of the demonstrators in China back in '89. They even went into his room and detained him and everything. What he was saying is that, you know, that whole...
Hey, Frenchie?
Yeah.
Something's happened to our connection. You're very garbled. Did you change?
Maybe it's my voice, or I'm too far away from my phone. How's that?
It's not quite.
No?
Are you try again.
No. Let me move a little bit. Maybe we have a bad reception.
Okay.
All right. And yeah, I was talking with Mike Shenoy at the time, and he comes to Taipei a lot.
Are you moving, Frenchie? Are you moving?
Yeah, I did.
You need to stop moving because you're in and out.
Yeah. And basically what he was saying was that that whole movement that, you know, telling people how to call them and so on was basically just like the Cultural Revolution in China and what was happening in the West.
Frenchie, we're losing you.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna hang up and try to call back then.
Okay, I'm going to talk with our Carl while we're doing that, okay?
No problem.
Thanks. And here's our Carl helping me down the home stretch, right, our Carl?
I'll try. Yeah, I had a question, and I asked you one time, and I think you gave good advice to call in during Churchill Downs, and so that others could hear your response, and I think that's a good idea. I had asked you about your particular stand on the issue of the spelling of Chamorro ending with an O and Chamorro ending with a U and Chamorro starting with a capital C and a capital H. And sometimes, you know, I'm still using the same spelling I've used for decades, but I was just wondering what your take is on that. I'm not really interested in changing how I spell or say things.
Here goes. Okay,
right.
Whether it ends in a U or an O, it's pronounced the same way, Chamorro. Yeah. Without being overly technical, to understand linguistics, you have to understand the word phoneme. And you have to understand the word allophone. And I'll give you an example. In English, there is a phoneme that we would represent by the letter P inside of 2 slashes. And P has 2 allophones, and I'll show you what the 2 allophones of P are, okay? One is, I'm going to use a word P-O-P. I could pronounce it pop, or I could pronounce it pop. You hear the difference?
Slight, yeah, there's a slight.
Well, in English, it's not a phonemic difference. It doesn't change meaning to say pop or pop. In some languages, it does. Okay. So for Chamorro, the sound that we represent with an O or a U sounds the same. It would only change depending on the environment in which it occurs, meaning the following word. So changing the spelling doesn't change the pronunciation at all. Now, with the capital CH as a single letter, the reason for that is that this commission with another example of the separatist commission, Hope Cristobal, Laura Souter, Robert Underwood, etc., has adopted a new orthography. And in one of her columns, Laura Souter explained why it's so important that we have a new orthography, because it's an important part of nation building. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with literacy. which is what orthographies are supposed to be about. There's an awful lot of moaning and groaning on the island about, gosh, we're losing our Fino Chamorro. Young people aren't speaking it, and the ones who can speak it are dying off, and on and on and on. We've got to revitalize Chamorro. So how do you go about doing that? You go about doing that by changing the orthography, taking something that's difficult already and then making it more difficult with a new orthography, which frankly doesn't make any sense. The orthography that we've adopted is nonsensical. To start a word with a capital CH will cause any reader, even local readers, to wonder, is this a misprint? Did he not do a spell check before he sent this letter out to me? This is obviously wrong. No word has the second letter capitalized. And there's no reason for it because there's no confusion with the sound that CH represents. It sounds like this. Shh. So the plain old CH is plenty good enough. One of the things that the orthography does is it makes the glottal stop. And one other example, the capitalization of N and G when they occur. Now, N and the combination N-G is really hard for an English speaker to pronounce. Not hard in Chamorro. It's a regular sound in Chamorro. The Chamorro word for duck is nga. And you can learn to say it, but it doesn't fit very well in an English mouth. But once again, the same thing. Why would you want to capitalize both those letters? And back to the glottal stop. If you're using a word that you could pronounce H-A-G-A, if you put a glottal stop on the end of it, it changes the meaning. It could be either haga or haga. You see the difference, Carl?
Yeah, again, a slight difference.
You see the difference, okay.
Yeah.
So when you say haga, if you're writing that down, you put an apostrophe after the A, because the apostrophe is, for want of a better term, a letter in the Chamorro orthography. So if you have a sentence that ends with the word haga, that apostrophe and the period at the end of the sentence don't get along with one another very well at all. Once again, anybody looking at it says, man, this guy doesn't know how to type. Right. So if you have to have a letter for the glottal stop, use something like X. So at least it fits. But there's no need for a new orthography. We started out with the Spanish orthography. That's why we have Jigo and Jonia. In some dialects in Spanish, the word for I in Spanish is Y-O. And in Puerto Rico, you would pronounce that yo. I am hungry. Yo soy mucho hambre.
Yo tengo hambre.
Yeah, yo tengo hambre, yeah. So that's how we got the Y's, right? And it makes perfect sense. It's something that's been around for probably 500 years. The rules are all there. Everybody knows it. The next thing, we're going to all have to go around and change our names to conform to the new orthography. And I was talking with a guy yesterday who's really up in arms because of this commission now, Building Nations, going around changing all the place names, is going to cost businessmen literally thousands of dollars as they change their business cards, letterheads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a trip that's absolutely unnecessary. There's nothing wrong with Chamorro. And every time I go to Agana, I tell my friends down in Agana that Chamorro is the word. Does that clarify it for you, Carl?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I appreciate that. I was just curious, what to think about it. I kept with it the same spelling I've used for decades, but I was wondering if there was another way to look at it.
Yeah. Frenchie, I'm going to go to repeat, and I'll have to get back to you on Mondays. Repeat's hanging out here in the green room. Go ahead, repeat.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in that in Puerto Rico, the day before today is always a comedy day because it's yesterday. Have a great weekend, Uncle Bob.
Yeah, well, we hate weekends around here on Tall Tales, but we'll do our best, repeat. Yeah.
Endure.
Okay, I should have kept Frenchie on the line. Repeat was his usual brief self.
It brought us to the weekend. I feel a little better.
Yeah. So what do we got? 2 minutes to go, Jose?
Like about 30 seconds.
About 30 seconds. Well, once again, I could refer you to the Pacific Island Times. There's some really good reading there. You might want to pick up a copy of the Daily News if you hadn't read the article that I showed you where Joe Titano, the reporter, proved the very point that I was kvetching about at the Rotary meeting. That might be a good chuckle for you. Well, whatever, we'll see you on Monday at 1600. We'll do the best that we can to get through this weekend. So long.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The White House with another vaccine push. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News.
You are vaccinated. You are safe.
President Biden imploring Americans to get the shot with coronavirus Delta cases continuing to rise.
CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky urged those who are hesitant to get the shot to seek out reliable information.
Ask your questions. Talk to your healthcare provider. Talk to your pharmacist. Talk to your friends and neighbors who have gotten vaccinated and get your questions answered.
She also reiterated during the briefing that the CDC's guidance on mask wearing has not changed and that those who are unvaccinated should wear a mask to protect those around them.
Fox's Tanya J. Powers, while not specifically mandating players be vaccinated, the NFL is putting pressure on them. The commissioner warning all 32 NFL teams there'll be no games rescheduled this season when players test positive, but games could be forfeited, and if that happens, players from both teams won't get paid. Starting in Chicago, the Justice Department launching an effort in several cities to reduce gun violence by trying to stop the flow of illegal guns.
We're learning from the past. This is a particular tactic, this particular one, which is to work on networks of gun trafficking, which are bringing the guns into the city and try to take those down in order to reduce the number of these illegal guns in the city.
Attorney General Merrick Garland, 10 people were killed in Chicago last weekend, the victims of violent crime. For the second time in a week, Washington, D.C. residents dodging bullets from a drive-by shooting. 2 people wounded in the northwest part of D.C. on a street with several restaurants.
When it comes to